If you were to watch a worker bee on a flower in your garden, you'd notice it landing on one flower and then moving on to the next a few seconds later. You've probably seen hundreds of them land and not find it strange at all. But I imagine you've never asked yourself this question. How much honey does that single bee actually produce in its short life? The answer is actually far less than you might think. And this fact reveals a huge truth about how a hive works. Tonight, as you open a jar of honey at your kitchen table and take a spoonful, every single drop in that jar will be the sum of weeks of labor by thousands of bees. And from this moment on, a bee in your garden is perhaps making one of the last flights of its life. And perhaps what it collects in this work is less than a teaspoonful from each of them. Again, right now, inside a hive, thousands of bees are working simultaneously at the same speed, gathering an amount that none of them could achieve alone. Before we begin the video, I want you to subscribe, because on this channel we will continue to explain and describe the most striking details of nature that pass before your eyes, but you don't notice. I want you to listen to this video until the very end, because when we explain the total distance a bee travels in its lifetime, it will ensure that you never see that little bee in your garden the same way again. 1. A bee's lifetime is worth less than a drop. When it comes to a bee's lifetime honey production, it's incredibly small, but a worker bee born in the summer months can live for an average of 5 to 6 weeks. It spends almost all of this time just flying. At the end of this period, when we look back, all that remains is the amount of honey it produced, about 1/12 of a teaspoon. To visualize this, a teaspoon. So, if we compare this to a human lifespan, it's like someone working for 8 to 10 years and still not even having a handful. One of the reasons for this small amount is not that a single bee's capacity is limited. The nature of the work is that it's divided. They work in sections. One bee collects nectar, another takes it over in the hive and processes it, another evaporates the water and prepares it for honey, and another places it in the honeycomb and seals it. So, this bee is never the sole producer of honey. It's just one link in a long production chain. Also, you shouldn't forget that a worker bee's life isn't solely spent collecting honey. It spends its first weeks inside the hive cleaning the honeycomb, feeding the larvae, and caring for the queen bee. It only goes out to collect honey in the second half of its life. So, that 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey doesn't actually encompass the bee's entire life. It's just the product of its last few weeks. That single bee you see in your garden is just one member of a huge production chain, and perhaps you're just watching it during its most productive, shortest period. 2. It takes 2 million stops for half a kilogram of honey. In fact, this small contribution becomes much more striking when compared to the distance the bee travels. That is, a worker bee has to visit dozens of flowers not just to bring back a jar of honey, but even for a single collection of nectar. To explain further, on average, a bee visits between 50 and 100 flowers in a single flight, and this flight can be repeated many times throughout the day. If we add up all these flights throughout the day, it's like a shuttle working non-stop from sunrise. It doesn't rest, it doesn't stop, it just lands on a flower and takes off again, continuing its work. According to apiologists' calculations, bees need to visit approximately 2 million flowers in total to produce just half a kilogram of honey. So, if we think about it, 2 million visits are just for half a kilogram of honey. But it's impossible for a single bee to achieve this. Therefore, this figure actually represents the sum of the combined efforts of hundreds, even thousands, of bees. Even if each visit to the flowers lasts only seconds, when those seconds add up, they create a number that is difficult for the human mind to comprehend. Sometimes the hive may seem silent. From the outside, it may give the impression of being calm and still. But the traffic happening at that moment is actually no different from the morning traffic of a city. Only instead of horns, there is the sound of wings, and instead of roads, there are flowers. That still silence of your garden is actually just a thin curtain covering an invisible movement. 3. Thousands you don't see. I would like to emphasize that while individual labor is so small, the hive compensates for this deficiency with its numbers. In an active hive, 50 to 60,000 bees can work together during the summer. A significant portion of them go out simultaneously to collect nectar, while the rest take on different tasks inside the hive. So, the bees you see individually in your garden are actually just a small, visible part of a gigantic organism. As you can understand, a hive can process approximately 2 to 3 kilograms of nectar per day during a good season. This nectar thickens by losing water inside the hive and eventually becomes honey. This process works like a factory line. One group carries the nectar, another group takes it over and evaporates the water with their wings, and another group places the mature honey into the honeycomb and seals it. No bee does the entire job alone. Everyone takes on a small part. To give an example, this means that those few bees you see are actually just the part of the thousands you don't see that is overflowing. The hive becomes a collecting machine that no single bee could do alone. You only see the outermost surface of this machine, a few spots flying in the sun. 4. The surplus generously given by the hive. Generally, this is the situation. This daily labor, when accumulated over a season, scales up even more. A healthy hive in a good summer can produce 15 to 25 kilograms of surplus honey beyond its own needs. This is exactly the part that beekeepers harvest. This figure, compared to the amount a single bee produces in its lifetime, shows how much the labor of thousands of bees over months adds up to. Of course, but remember, this figure does not include the amount the hive consumes itself. To survive the winter, the hive sets aside a large portion of the honey it produces, sometimes over 10 kilograms, just for itself. When there are no flowers left outside, when the weather gets cold, this stored honey becomes the hive's only source of food, so every drop is actually saved like an insurance policy. Now, there is also this situation. So the honey you see in that jar is actually the surplus generously given by the hive. You never see the portion it keeps to survive. The portion that ends up in your kitchen is the result of a sharing where the hive says, "Give us more than we need." The rest is silently consumed on the darkest day of winter. 5. There is labor that circles the world. And now, when we put all these numbers together, the picture that emerges is truly breathtaking. For the total honey a hive produces in a year, the bees, according to calculations, travel a distance that would circle the world several times in total. Some biologists state that the flight distance required for just half a kilogram of honey is close to the length of circling the world. When you consider a hive's production for a season, this distance multiplies many times over. Ultimately, a single bee can never accomplish this. This distance is the sum of small contributions accumulated over months by thousands of bees, each flying only a few kilometers. None of them knows how far the others have flown. None of them calculates the total distance. Each one simply completes its own short task. But when these tasks combine, a network of labor emerges that envelops the planet. Now, there's also this. And those who do this are tiny creatures that live for 5 or 6 weeks, each leaving behind only a 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey in their lifetime. A small life, a small contribution, but when repeated millions of times, it transforms into a network of labor that envelops the planet. That single bee in your garden is actually a small but real step on this enormous map. And definitely don't forget, do you remember the question at the beginning? How much honey does a bee actually produce in its lifetime? Now you know, almost none. Something like 1/12 of a teaspoon, an immeasurably small amount. But that single bee, that bee on the rose bush, wasn't alone. Thousands of its companions in the hive were working simultaneously with the same patience. The bee outside right now might be making its last flight, or it might be landing on its 100th flower. Whichever it is, the trail it leaves is so small it's invisible to the eye. But the accumulation of thousands of trails fills that jar on your kitchen table. That quiet garden you thought was empty wasn't empty at all. It's just that the traces of labor were so small you couldn't notice them. You'd been living next to it for years. Now you know. Also, have you ever noticed a bee persistently circling the same flower branch in your garden, as if searching for something? Perhaps at that moment, it was experiencing the most productive few seconds of the whole day, and you were watching it without knowing it. See you in the next video.